What makes a fight scene well written? Not a very simple question to answer. Not because the answer is complicated. Well, it kinda is. But because there are many answers. Just as there's no single right way to write a good story, there's more than one element that makes a good fight. There can be complex answers to this question, but there are also simple ones too. There are simple things that make a fight good. So simple, in fact, that we forget them. Why? How? Because we mistake simple with unimportant. Take the throne room fight scene from The Last Jedi. It's simple to know that your actors shouldn't drop their weapons by accident. It should go without saying. But that's also the problem with simple rules. No one says anything about them. Because it's so simple, it shouldn't need to be said. But when we learn not to say something, people get complacent, lazy. They mistake visual spectacle for quality. Suddenly, it makes so much sense how people can excuse fights like these. Because you can never truly appreciate the simple things in fights until you've seen them horribly fucked up. So while I would like to show off a fight from an anime I've been watching recently, I get the impression it'll get as much attention as Summertime Rendering has this season, which is also an anime I'd like to talk about and cannot recommend enough. Seriously, if you haven't watched it, go do that. It's a fantastic anime, and it ain't getting nearly enough attention that it deserves sitting lonely on Disney+. But we need something to contrast them with. To really appreciate the simple things done right, we need something that does them horribly wrong. Maybe not on the same level as The Last Jedi, but certainly something like it. Unlimited Blade Works. Truly, a fine example of masturbatory visual brain candy instead of substantive and methodical choreography. You think I'm exaggerating, don't you? It's all one big bit, and Pete's gonna show us a truly bad anime with even worse fight scenes, and we'll all have a grand old time, and no one's feelings will be hurt. Surely he doesn't mean Unlimited Budget Works, made by the holy grail of modern Japanese animation, produced by the same studio that gave us Demon Slayer, UFO Table themselves? No. I'm not exaggerating when I say that the choreography in these fights are so bad that even some of the scenes that aren't fights have the same problems.
Hey, you there!
If Shira was up against the wall, how did she reach him from there? If she was anywhere close to him, Shira wouldn't have room to dodge backwards. This might work if she were attacking from the side, like how it showed her, even though the pole should be hitting up against the wall from how close she was swinging to it. But then it shows us that she actually swung at him from behind, and also, you seriously came all the way down to the archery dojo after club had ended this late in the evening just so that you could assault a student. You degenerate bitch. What? Who does that? This is before the first fight of episode 1, by the way, and it's pretty much like this all throughout. You want to tell me that the writing is good at least? Okay, fine. I'll choose to believe you until proven otherwise. But so many fights, from one perspective or another, are bad. And I think one of the best examples of that has to be the Ilya and Berserker fight. Or basically the entire third episode. Which is good, cause you can rest assured there won't be too many heavy spoilers if you haven't seen Blade Works yet. Though I do not make any promises. So this is as good a time as any to warn you. If you haven't seen the invasion arc of World Trigger, and up to episode 15 of Summertime Rendering, consider this your final warning. So what is something simple that the invasion arc and episode 15 of Summertime get right, that the Berserker fight doesn't? How about just general consistency? Kind of a staple for good writing in general, but it's equally important that things like your weapons and abilities in a fight are consistent. If a guy does a thing, he should be able to do the thing consistently. If he doesn't do the thing, there should be a reason why it's conditional. And that condition should also be consistent. It's not rocket science when understanding how a lack of consistency can affect your fights and how your audience perceives them. Let's say you have Dave over here, wielder of Excalibur, bane of all leather-based objects, capable of cutting through any hide-woven textiles with ease. When he goes up against someone wearing leather armor, you know, this guy's gonna die. So, when we're shocked to see that Dave's sword has no effect, we realize, oh, that wasn't leather armor, that was just plot armor. And forgive the wordplay, but I'm being very serious. Inconsistent feats can very easily create plot armor or plot poison almost all of the time. Conversely, when your character's weapons and skills are consistent, it can literally create the stakes of the fight. Take Summertime Rendering, for example. I already went over most of this stuff in the video about stakes, but what else do we know? Well, we know about what the regular shadows are, what they can do, and how they're killed are one thing. What about this Shide guy? He's a gigantic shadow that has even stronger feats than the normal shadows. He has lightning-fast reflexes, can summon guns, shields, and has a lot of both offensive and defensive feats. He also can't be killed like any ordinary shadow. Unlike the others, his entire body seems to be a shadow, and it's nowhere near as frail as the others. Honestly, we don't even know if he can be killed. Shide is only terrifying as a villain because of how he stands relative to our protagonist. He can die and come back, sure, but he can only go back so far, and only one more time. And the fact that we still don't know a lot about who Shide is or how to defeat him means that we want Shinpei to save that last reset because he'll need it to figure these things out. But that investment only exists when we understand where both Shide and Shinpei stand comparatively. And that understanding can only be reached when the feats of both characters are consistent. Even the things that we don't know before are still things that could be informed. Even though we've never seen Ushio teleport herself using her hair, it's not something out of plausibility based on what we've seen before. We've seen her use strands of her own hair to make objects she scanned, and since her body is also just a scanned object, it's not hard to imagine that she could treat that the same as anything else she scanned. It still plays off of the rules we learned, so when it's revealed, it's not some asspull that comes out of nowhere. It's a genuinely clever usage of the powers we already know about. And that only happened because of everything that we know about these characters, their power levels, and the magic systems at play, and most importantly, the fact that all of these things were all consistent. And if we're gonna talk about really good magic systems, I guess we better talk about... Does anyone else hear that? The fuck is that noise? Hey, Kaiser! Listen, Kaiser, the big boys, like me, are gonna take care of this. Why don't you go back to your channel where it's safe? For you little baby boo. I'm a big boy!
Okay people, here's the rundown. World Trigger takes place in a world that is occasionally attacked by aliens called neighbors. The ones who stop them are our good guys who work for the organization called Border, a defense guard for the Earth that the neighbors have to pay for, just as God intended. The magic system the characters use is called Tryon, a form of energy that can be used for many things from creating facilities, transform characters into energy constructs, and utilize jury-rigged alien weaponry called Trigger.
He said it!
One of World Trigger's greatest strengths, in my opinion, is that its magic system takes a meticulous amount of time to introduce to the viewers. Everything from the weapons, how they work, what they're good at, and the prowess of each characters all plays a part in setting the groundwork for all fights to come. No friendship power beam struggles here, people. Every single win earned in this show is because the characters find exploits in their opponents and use that to their advantage, mostly by understanding how their powers work and not in the one-trick pony show way that a lot of shonen like to do. In fact, it's this among many factors that makes World Trigger, despite the uncultured in the West not catching on, has some of the best fight structure and strategy of most battle shonen to date. And before I speak the gospel as to why, let's set the stakes real quick. The invasion arc is the war arc of the show. Basically, it is a huge, wide-scale alien invasion by a nation called Aftokrata, who are there, like most neighbors, to capture humans and turn them into energy cubes to take back to their world.
The fuck kind of neighborhood do you live in?
Look, energy cube, sugar cube, same difference. Anyways, one particular person they are trying to capture is Chica, one of the three main characters, who has one of the highest levels of Tryon in the series. Because of course she does. Both our MCs, Osamu Mikumo and Yuma Kuga, and the rest of Border aim to stop them and get Chica to safety. Let's use two of the main villains, Mira and Hyrian, as our test subjects here. Both are defeated because of how our heroes understood their abilities. Mira is able to create portals due to her trigger-specific power for various purposes. However, Shuji, one of the other characters in the show, was able to take advantage of them once he knew how they worked. She could teleport just about any projectile next to her enemies and even transport herself, but it also gave a path back to her. As for Hyrian, Osamu was only able to get away from him as long as he did by exploiting the weakness in his trigger. Hey, something he learned from getting tipped by previous characters who fought him. Basic cause and effect? What? That's something. Anyway, since his power only affects Tryon objects and not physical ones, Osamu was basically invulnerable to Hyrian's attacks once he reverted to his human form. Now, if you, as the writer, decide to, I don't know, just cuck out and decide to change any of these elements for literally no reason, congratulations! You basically threw your audience's knowledge of the fight's stakes in the fucking garbage, and any payoffs you do later will get bottlenecked as a result. Randomly telling us that all we knew was a lie all along, actually, is the stuff all plot armor is made of, anime bullshit or otherwise. Actually, speaking of anime bullshit, let's get back to where Blade Works goes wrong in this regard. In fairness, these kinds of inconsistencies isn't its weakest suit if all we're talking about is this one fight, but it's still pretty bad, and I'm gonna show you why. Well, actually, not me. Pete will show you. He's more of the expert in that area. Reject visual novel cringe. Embrace horror culture.
So the fight starts with Berserker charging Shiro before Archer intercepts the attack. It doesn't do anything, so Berserker again charges Shiro. This is really good because it establishes our villain's motivations, or what they're after. We can infer that because Berserker tried to kill Shiro twice in a row, killing him is the goal. Even if not to kill him, we know that he certainly means to harm him. And since Archer can't do anything to stop him, that's when Saber intercepts, and the fight continues from there. And there we have it. Berserker wants to harm Shiro, and Saber has to prevent that. Now we have a fight.
Wait, so this fight actually has stakes?
Well, yes, but actually no. Saber seems to hold her own against someone more than twice her size. I suppose we can just chalk that up to super strength or some bullshit. But we can also see that Berserker is strong enough to push her back. But then we also see her weight is enough to keep him from lifting his sword. These two clips are inconsistent. One suggests that Berserker is strong enough to move Saber, and the other says that he isn't. And I wish that was the last of it. Later, we see that he mows right through her as though she were nothing, proceeds to throw her around like a rag doll, and then immediately we're shown this is wrong again as she blocks his attack without being moved. As much as it seems like a nitpick, it's important to know because it impacts our understanding of the stakes. Berserker was trying to kill Shiro, and we were led to believe that the only reason why he couldn't was because Saber could stop him. Now we're being shown that she can't stop him, meaning that there's nothing stopping him from finishing what he started. And knowing that now changes our understanding of the stakes. Why doesn't he kill Shiro? He knows Shiro is Saber's master, and killing him would also kill Saber. Does he not want to kill Shiro? Is that not what he was after? Then why was his first two attacks targeting Shiro instead of Saber? What was previously a straightforward representation of Berserker's motivations is now a vague skew, which, to be fair, wouldn't be a problem if our characters were aware of this. If Berserker acted consistently on these motivations to kill Shiro and end the fight with Saber more efficiently, this would be a nitpick. But when characters are given the chance to act on something, and they don't, we're not just talking about consistency in feats, now we're talking about consistency in motivation. Even in fights where character development isn't at play, all fights involve character and their motivations. Everything from what they're fighting for, why they want to win, and the way they intend to win reflects on their motivations as characters. Even just something like their priorities informs us about those motivations. We saw that it was originally Berserker's priority to kill Shiro, but now we're being told otherwise. Even in this position, everything is in his favor to kill Shiro like he intended. Rin can't stop him, Archer can't stop him, Saber is clear the fuck over here. All Berserker needs to do is turn around and charge Shiro. Saber would have to move twice as fast as Berserker, and somehow awkwardly position herself in between Berserker and her master, a complex maneuver that could put her at a disadvantage, and that's even assuming she can make it there in time at all. She could stab him while his back is turned, but, killing doesn't seem to work on him very well.
You should just ignore the dumb riffraff. After all, Archer and Rin's attacks can never overcome your noble phantasm.
So when he doesn't act on this perfect opportunity, it reflects poorly on Berserker's motivations. For that matter, it reflects poorly on Saber for not keeping in greater mind how vulnerable her master really is. And she straight up retreats from Berserker's advances. If he had decided to turn around at any point, her master is fucked. And this isn't the only time that this happens either. At the beginning, she lets her master run ahead of her, instead of maintaining a constant stance between Shiro and Berserker. Once again, she leaves her master vulnerable. Hell, before any of this, she didn't react in the slightest when Archer threatened her master right in front of her.
Rin,
What is it?
if an enemy is easy to slay, then we ought to do so.
You don't have to tell me that, okay?
Oh, but he's the exception because she knows that Archer is just such a trustworthy individual from the whole 10 minutes she's known him. Why?
Because shut up.
Actually, let's talk about Archer real quick. He's probably the worst offender in this regard from what you're showing me right here. I mean, riddle me this, people. Throughout this whole fight, he's got sights on everyone from the skyscraper he is on. So all of them are fair game for 360 no-scoping. So here's my question, why doesn't he just
destroy the child?
I mean, I like to avoid child protective services too, people, but come on, if Ilya is eliminated, a Berserker goes along with her, as per the rules of the series. The longer he leaves her alive, the more danger Rin could be in as the fight continues for all the same reasons Pete said about why Saber can't stop Berserker. Every second that goes by where he isn't headshying the psychopathic lolly is further damage to his character motivations. But let's say, hypothetically, that he has an excuse, and that's not out of possibility. I mean, after all, Shide and Hyrian also gave up on their targets during their bouts. Hyrian lets Osamu leave in episode 33 despite Chika being his main target, and Shide lets Nezu and the others go despite being a clear source of frustration to both he and Heine. In fact, the latter could easily kill them if he wanted to. He's already killed all of them himself in a previous time loop.
Actually, it was super easy. Barely an inconvenience. Oh, really?
However, besides defeating the point of bringing his 1,000 Heartless squad with him to deal with Shinpei's own small army, fact is, Shide and Heine can't afford to be distracted. If Shinpei survives for too much longer, he may put some distance between himself and the event horizon, gaining an extra loop or two in the process, which is exactly what ends up happening, by the way. And with each loop, Shinpei has more opportunities to disrupt their plans. Even using one of his friends as a hostage may not work because Shinpei, the objectivist king that he is, understands he can bring them back via time travel. But once he's out of the picture, all the others are just fair game at that point. The only person Shide hasn't killed yet is Ushio, who's arguably a bigger threat than Shinpei. No matter which way you slice it, chasing after them takes priority. Why waste the time? So it fits best with his motivations. By comparison, Hyrian's excuse goes with saying even less than that. It's obvious why he's letting Osamu escape. Osamu is crippled, so he can't get very far, and he has a tracker attached to his arm. On top of that, he can't turn his back on Shuji here, who, like most emo anime boys, tend to be very incredibly powerful, which prevents him from going any further. Hell, he even slows the motherfucker down a couple points. Which is why he seeks Mira, who can deal with Osamu because she's faster due to her portals, And honestly, Osamu's a total jobber by comparison, crippled or otherwise. Osamu may have their main objective in his possession, allegedly, but that's pretty small potatoes in the face of all that. Especially since 99% of all border agents are being held off by their forces, meaning that they don't really have that much outside help until later in the fight. In the end, it proved to be their biggest mistake, but it's a believable one on their part. So, what about Archer? Doesn't he have an excuse not to, shoot the child?
I suppose he could, but it'd have to be contradicted when he basically lets Castor go free in episode 7 in hopes that she'll deal with Berserker instead. Because it means that he's okay if someone else kills Ilia, even though he isn't okay killing her himself. And we can't assume he honestly thinks that Castor will only kill Berserker and not Ilia, because how could he possibly predict that anyways? But besides Archer having no reason to care, the fact is that any inaction on the servant's part also reflects poorly on the master. Archer may have a motive not to kill Ilia, but Rin sure as fuck does not. She should be ordering Archer to take the shot that he's refusing to make. But unlike Archer, she's actually trying to kill Ilia. I mean, if Rin didn't want to kill her, why fight her? What's she gonna do if she wins? And whatever her goal is, whether to kill or even incapacitate, is there really anything that she could do that Archer couldn't also accomplish far more effectively? Do you see how Archer's inaction also affects Rin's character? And this goes for Ilia too. Berserker avoiding every opportunity to take Shiro out, especially when he's ordered to deal with Saber instead, flies in the face of what we know about Ilia's motivation.
I'm going to make him suffer in Kiritsugu's place.
If you want to argue that neither of them wanted to kill Shiro, that's honestly all the more reason Ilia should have engaged him herself instead of fucking off into some distant part of the forest, giving her target a chance to escape. Because no matter what you want to say about it, her motivation should still be Shiro's suffering. And by going clear the fuck all the way over here where Rin is, she gives Shiro an out from that. And also never does anything else to rectify that after this episode. None of the parts I mentioned directly deal with the development of any characters, but you can see how just the actions and priorities of the combatants involved can still inform their character. Writing a fight scene just so that you can have a fight or something that looks or sounds cool is a surefire way to make mistakes like these, because any decision a character makes will inform us of their character. You can't just be indifferent about this. Sometimes it can come off as lazy writing, but this isn't what's truly lazy about it. Now stick with me here, because there's one more concept when writing a fight that's fairly simple, but it's not going to be simple to explain. We've talked about power scale consistency, or what both parties are capable of and what that means. We've talked about motivations, which covers what both parties want to accomplish in the fight. Both of these are key to making stakes, but there's still one integral piece that's missing. Consequences. What happens when one side wins? What happens when the other loses? What happens if both lose? What happens if they both win? You can throw around motivations and power levels all the livelong day you want, but you can't have stakes if there's nothing at stake. And there's a lot of different ways to include substantive consequences for your fights. The most common tend to be death, an absolute end to your character, never to have any further impact on the plot onward. Of course, like all things that end, there's a level of attachment that we, and even the writer, have to these characters. Lethal consequences can be necessary to solidify the stakes of the fight, but we don't want to give up these characters that we still have so much use for. So the problem arises, how do you have consequences for your fights without killing the characters you don't want to? Injuries are a good place to start, but it's a fine line. Debilitating your characters is a perfect consequence of battle without resorting to killing them. But the most exhausting injuries are, unfortunately, always the ones closest to death. They carry weight because the possibility of death exists. The character might not die, but you can't treat injuries, especially gruesome ones, as though it's only there to get a rise out of your audience. So now we have another problem. How can you allow your characters to sustain heavy and debilitating injuries while still keeping them alive without breaking any of the realism you established? Well, that's the magic of storytelling. Literally, we're going to talk about magic systems. Are you starting to see how this is not so simple to explain? Don't worry, I promise it'll click in a minute. The role that the magic system plays is that it allows us to bend traditional rules of realism to fit the world of the narrative. This is done for a lot of reasons, but one of them is to allow us to have gruesome injuries that hinder our characters as a consequence of battle. And it can also do this in a way that doesn't put those characters at risk, even though the risk of death is still real. As an example, Summertime Rendering's magic system basically allows any death for any character to be undone if Shinpei manages to go back in time. So they've heavily reduced the chance of death without ruining the realism of the story. People can still be shot or stabbed, and it'll still kill them. Lethal consequences still exist, but instead of being ignored, they are accounted for by the story's magic system. So now that we can prevent death using this system, the consequences lie with the limitations of that system. If any death can be undone at no cost to Shinpei, then there can be no consequences from battle, and that's why there are limitations. The most obvious of which is that Shinpei can only go back so far. Each loop will slowly and progressively take him back closer and closer to the present. He can distance himself from this cutoff point, but once he's gone back to a particular point in time, he can't go back to that time or any other before it ever again. All events that happened up to then are stuck that way permanently. This also means the more frequently Shinpei uses his power to reset time, the closer he gets to the cutoff point where he won't be able to reset any further, at which point he will be permanently dead. In fact, this is how our villains plan to win. They're going to exhaust Shinpei's abilities by killing him over and over until he can't do it anymore.
Wait a second, doesn't that just mean only the last death carries consequences? I mean, if he can start another loop, then it shouldn't be a problem, right?
That's an excellent question, Kaiser. Well, for one, it isn't done on his terms, meaning that he loses the loop. Consider the beginning of episode 15. Shinpei just got sniped through the head before he could realize what was going on and got that much closer to the event horizon. Before all that, he could loop 2 times, maybe more if he could distance himself from the cutoff point. Now he only has 1 loop. That's 1 loop less that he could have used for something really important. If he loses another in this fight, he'll have to wait an extremely long time before he can gain another. And if anything happens during that time, he may not be able to loop back and undo it. And let's be real, we all know that he's not going to lose all of his loops and then die. He's the main character after all. Even if you haven't seen the story's conclusion, we can still safely say that much. But Ushio? She's the only one who can't come back from a loop. If she dies, that's it. Even injuries are carried over in between loops, and they can't be healed until she can scan her corpse back at the hospital. And it's extremely important that these things affect her because she's the most important player on Shinpei's side.
With clever usage of magic systems, you can maintain consequences of battles while still having lethal injuries that don't permanently kill your characters. And World Trigger's magic system is really interesting for that very reason. You see, in World Trigger, actual death is uncommon.
You mean people don't die when they are killed? I've been lied to my whole life!
I ran right into that one, didn't I? So yeah, you can stab them, shoot them, dismember them, bleed them out, and none of it actually affects the characters. It's all just happening to their Tryon bodies, while their real ones are in an Animorph-style pocket dimension. What's cool about this is that they've removed the consequences of death without removing the consequences of injury. Being dismembered can still downgrade the character's combat prowess significantly, like having a limb cut off so that you can't use other weapons, especially if you're a dual-wielding person, or get punctured or stabbed or shot up so much that your Tryon energy goes low and you basically get incapacitated early. And as if this show wasn't based enough, fights in World Trigger are never as simple as,
well, just fucking kill me!
Rather, fights involve more specific objectives for both sides. In the case of the Invasion arc, the goal is to kidnap the targets with high levels of Tryon. Chica, being one of the strongest in that regard, makes her their highest value target possible. After she's transformed into a Tryon cube, the goals for our villains at that point are to get her from Osamu, while our heroes get her to safety. Most characters' lives aren't at risk necessarily, but there are still things at stake. And injuries can still very easily affect a story down the line. Sure, the Boar agents can always
Bust out like a bitch.
but then they can't fight for a while until they can regain their lost Tryon. When Replica gets cut in half, even though it doesn't kill him, Osamu literally has to carry him on top of Chica while being crippled. and a lot of his functions that he was using to help Osamu get debilitated as a result. If he was still in one piece when they reached the entrance to the enemy ship, Replica could have forced the enemies to retreat without being stuck on the ship when the door closed. And on a more personal note, this also affects Yuma's character. Replica is literally his only connection to his previous life before the story began. He was basically family to the guy. Losing him affects him pretty badly, and it has a noticeable impact on his character. And on a more painful note, remember when I said that Osamu turned his human body at the tail end of this fight? Well,
I have a f***ing hole in my chest. Why didn't you block that one?
I thought you had it.
No!
yeah, point is, in both of these examples, with just a little creativity, you can maintain the consequences of battle and realism of your story while preserving dire stakes. This is also good for another big reason: shock value. Yes, I know people, cheapy McCheapskate, but come on, this is all entertainment at the end of the day. And this is an effective way of jump-starting your viewer's investment. When you see Mio and Shinpei get shot through the head in episode 1, that imagery carries a lot of impact on its own, even more so since we haven't been told Shinpei can rewind time yet. And of course, with Osamu getting stabbed and Chika potentially being taken by these aliens, going that far to prove how ruthless and committed the villains are is both an elegant and direct way of shocking the audience. Injuries like these happen so little in World Trigger during these fights that it is genuinely suspenseful when it actually happens, especially the first time if you didn't expect it, which I guess I ruined the surprise for a lot of you, but please watch World Trigger, it's really good, I swear, please just watch that, stop giving My Hero Academia attention, go to this for once, for fuck's sake.
Shock value isn't inherently a bad thing. What's important is that it isn't the only thing. Now, concerning the injuries relevant to the Berserker fight, there aren't really a lot that happened during it, outside of Berserker's insane regeneration, but there is one injury sustained at the tail end of the fight, and another just a bit before it began. Roughly an hour, maybe 90 minutes max in universe, before the fight started, Saber had fought Lancer, after which she sustained a pretty serious injury, getting impaled clean through her shoulder. Not only does nothing come from this, but she's healed with almost no trouble in between episodes. There's no bandaging, despite Reen's limited ability to heal wounds, particularly shoulder wounds as shown later in the anime, and Saber basically continues from episode 2 onwards as though she had never been stabbed there in the first place. The other injury was when Shiro coughed up blood and passed out at the end of the fight, after... well, we don't really know what caused it. And just like Saber's injury, it gets fixed the very next episode and is never so much as mentioned from then onward. It never creates pains that hinder Shiro's abilities, nor does it affect him in any other way after getting it. In fairness, there are reasons why these injuries are recovered from so quickly. Well, Shiro has an excuse. I don't know what to tell you about Saber. But with Summertime Rendering and World Trigger, we can see how injuries sustained in fights have an effect on how things play out. Both Replica being cut in half and Shinpei being sniped are impactful because we know things would be different if they never happened. But what actually changes if Saber was never impaled by Lancer? What if Shiro just didn't get an injury at the end of the Berserker fight? How much different would events be from how they are now? Fate's magic system may account for most of the injuries here, but it also invalidates their consequences. Try not to misunderstand. It's not inherently a bad thing that injuries don't have consequences, but it can be an indication of lazy writing when the writer doesn't want to follow through with any consequences they imply. Like I said, it's fine if you want the shock value from these kinds of things, but if that's all they're there for, you're no longer employing clever and creative writing devices, but rather cheap and emotionally manipulative tactics that are hollow at their very core. And Unlimited Blade Works is full of cheap and manipulative imagery exactly like this. Can you really say that scenes like these would feel as impactful if, instead of getting stabbed, our heroes just dodged out of the way? Of course not. But that's also what makes them so misleading, because the consequences are indistinguishable had they never been injured at all. Scenes like this are purposefully meant to mislead you into believing that Shiro is in danger, cause it looks like he just got fucking skewered through the chest. But later the anime tells us, oh, he's fine because it was just a stab through the shoulder. Asshole! The shoulder contains a massive artery responsible for pumping almost all of the blood to your arm. Assuming you don't bleed to death first, which I imagine will happen very quickly, you're losing all feeling there for a long time. And once you've finally seen these injuries for the cheap and manipulative imagery that they are, suddenly the consequences of the fight feel a lot less tangible. Consistency with your feats, consistency with your combatants' priorities, and maintaining constant consequences throughout the story to preserve the stakes in your fights. These are basic elements, so basic in fact to a fight that it's practically barely worth considering when looking at them at any deeper level than if the fight looks cool or not. Yet we don't say anything about them because of how unspecial it is to maintain any of them. It's completely normal in fact, and drawing attention to them is honestly a disservice to both Summertime and World Trigger when there are so many better things about their fights worth praising. And yet, it's important to be reminded with fights that fail these things, how just because they're simple does not make them unimportant. It may not give you any greater appreciation of the fights in Summertime Rendering or World Trigger, but I hope you can appreciate the simple things in fights from now onward when they're done right. Well, took me a while. I would have preferred not to have waited this long to make another video. I certainly wish I could have talked about Summertime Rendering while it was still airing, because, goddamn, I can't get enough of that show. If I wasn't working on other things, I almost wish I could do a full breakdown or analysis of it. Speaking of which, I may be going on another hiatus, because I'm trying to finish up one more video that I have been working way too long on, and I don't want to be distracted by it, not even by other videos, so who knows when I might make another upload. But in the meantime, you should check out Young Kaiser at his channel. He's a good friend of mine that I've been talking about videos with and writing, and I definitely feel like he deserves a lot more attention for the effort that he puts into his videos. Kaiser, you have something to say about yourself?
Alright, clout chasing aside, this video was really fun to make. I really liked interacting with Pete here. And if y'all want more collabs like this one, feel free to let us know in the comments. If my voice doesn't bother you too much, or any of my takes, feel free to check out my channel. At the time of this recording, I already have another video prepared to share with you all before the end of the year. In fact, forget about RWBY, okay? Forget about that show. Forget about whatever. Watch World Trigger. Moral of the story here, people. Watch World Trigger. Watch it. Love it. Dissect it. Make videos about it. Make love to it. I don't care. This show needs more love. In terms of fight structure and choreography and shit. Especially the latter portions of the show. It literally makes Jujutsu Kaisen look like a nursery rhyme in terms of that. That's how insane this shit can get.
And with all of that out of the way, I hope you guys have an excellent day, and stay platinum.